The wind smells of ash and ocean salt metal, sings against mail as a round modern shield catches sunrise over a land not his own. Steve Rogers steps from a shipless sky like a man who has walked out of another age into this one. The edge of his coat snapping with the same plain discipline that sets his shoulders. He does not wear a king's ring nor a mage's tall hat. He carries conviction the way others carry arms, and where he walks, the talk of war follows like shadow. Before him stands the last fellowship, an uneasy circle of light and fatigue. He walks into that ring with the blunt certainty of a man accustomed to giving orders that men will obey. They have met where sea wind and smoke braid the world on a headland pitted by fires old as the second fall of men. Stone benches hollow with rune and old blood hold those who will not be named lightly. One small bearer of a troubled weight. One ranger who has walked between crowns, one king without crown, and those whose names sing in forests and under mountains. Frodo Baggins clutches the ring-born tremor in his palm, his face a map of fear and faith. He looks up when the stranger moves among them, as if some other fate has finally come to stand in the doorway. Steve watches Frodo the way a sentry watches a flickering lamp. He does not speak at first. He studies the hand that holds the world's small ruin. He studies the faces that circle that hand. His silence is not doubt. It is calculation. He knows what a single point of failure will do to an army. He knows what one small thing left in the dark can reroute the fortunes of war. He has seen plans crumble under a single misstep. The ring trembles in the hobbit's fingers, and he thinks of hinges and levers, of supply lines and choke points. In words that are more map than myth, he says, "This is not merely a burden, it is an axis. If it falls to Sauron, every battle before us will be decided." The council answers first with the slow caution of long thought. Gandalf the Grey. Grey not only in hue, but in the patience of 100 ends and beginnings, lifts his staff as one clears a throat. "Aye," he says, and there is both warmth and warning in the word. It is an axis, but also a snare. What you call a fulcrum is also a voice that would undo the will that seeks its undoing. His fingers trace the air like smoke. He does not seek to meet Roger's gaze full-on. He hopes the soldier will turn away from strategy and hear the other music, a thing that corrupts. Steve meets the wizard's look with something like a salute. "I don't want its voice," he says plainly. "I want to strip its power so no one can hear it again." The question is not whether it tempts, but how it will be taken out of play. We plan a raid and call it a pilgrimage. We keep it moving in shadows. Those are risks that will kill us. We consolidate. We protect. We move with force where force will end greater war. His voice is stripped of flourish. It is small, accurate, like a blade honed for cutting. Plans. Aragorn's hand rests on the pommel of a sword that has tasted oath. "You would marshal us as a host," he says. There is respect in his tone and an old doubt. This quest was set for stealth and sacrifice. No banner was meant to be borne. Aragorn's eyes search the stranger's face as a ranger might search the ridgeline for favored ground. He does not dismiss the clarity. He weighs devotion against a soldier's logic and finds himself moved by both. Legolas speaks in a voice like wind over needles. A straight road invites arrows. The east is like a net. The elf's eyes are still the green of trees before dawn. Gimli of the mountain snorts and strikes his axe pommel. "A net is mended with iron," he answers, blunt and hot. "If we go like runners, men will fall and the net will tighten. Their words are flecks, small, bright, decisive. The fellowship's disputations are like the clicking of flint at the council's hearth. Steve lays out lines on no parchment, but in the air where soldiers learn to see them. He names no marches of old. He speaks of division of force, of watch rotations, of gambits to draw the eye away from one road while a smaller hand moves through another. He describes a shield bearer, a cord of scouts, a rear guard with instructions for withdrawal, and a plan for regrouping. He does not promise miracles. He promises discipline. We make the ring an objective, he says. We treat it like what it is, the hinge upon which victory turns. We will not worship it. We will make it a target and remove it. Murmurs cross the group like small birds alighting and then flying. Boromir's voice rises, rich with the need to save his city. If it is a hinge, he says, then it may be used to unlock what men need. Can a man not take up such strength to save his own? His eyes are two unwilling moons, honest and perilous. Fear and pride are coiled in his tone. He would grasp at any means to shield his people from shadow. Steve's answer is measured without sermon or scorn. You want to save your people, he says. I want to save them too. But the cost of taking that power will be a contagion. It will not stay in one hand. I have seen men take up the very thing that made them enemies. The way through is not to seize it for a nation, but to remove it as an instrument. He turns to Frodo as a commander turns to the man carrying the key to the plan. You will not be asked to wield it, he says quietly. You will be protected. We will hold ground for you to do what must be done. Frodo's voice is a small thing, like paper in a breath. I cannot be guarded against what I am, he says. Terror and wonder twist his words. It was given to me because I chose to take it for love of peace. He tries to straighten his shoulders. The ring's warm call is a hand at his throat, and his eyes dim with the thought of failing. Gandalf watches him, and then Steve with a look like old weather. We have tried other kinds of plans, the wizard says. Sometimes unmaking requires more than courage. It requires cunning and a kind of cruelty of the heart that makes men hard. His voice is not condemnation, but the ledger of knowing. He folds his fingers and then speaks again. If you ask of men something they were not meant to be, they will break. Yet if you ask nothing of them, all breaks in a greater fashion. There is a silence then, a stretch of wind and gull cry. The newcomer's shield catches the light and throws it back like a promise. His posture has not altered. He is a man who keeps time for others. He gives them a plan in pieces, like a craftsman handing over parts to be tested and accepted. He proposes a single command, clear, unambiguous, and a chain of responsibility in which each has a place and an oath. Name me your captains, he says, and I will name their watches. Give me the responsibility to move where movement opens the enemy's door, and to hold when holding saves the road. I will not command your hearts. I will command a formation. The words are not a trap, but a tactic. They unsettle the company like a sudden step on tide-swept rock. Aragorn hesitates. He remembers kingship that kneels to necessity. A single hand to hold command would ease confusion in battle, he admits at last. But who stands over the conscience of that hand? Who keeps a soldier from becoming the thing he fights? His voice is a ruler at the scales. He seeks reassurance, not surrender. Gandalf answers by looking at Frodo without words and then nodding once. A small capitulation from a man who has held many wills before. There are times When the world asks of us one harsh thing, he says, we will bind no man to do what he must not. But if a plan saves more than it consumes, it may be an answer to a question we cannot yet name. His gray eyes are distant, seeing threads and knots where others see only single lines. So the fellowship bargains with itself. Hobbits offer small courage. Men offer reluctant strategy. The elf and the dwarf find odd accord in practicality. Each voice is a vote cast by scar and story. They trade fears for measures and the measures for hope. Boromir's need for a salvific weapon is mollified by the promise that the ring will not become a tool of dominion. Aragorn keeps the honor of free will folded into the decision. Even Gandalf, who has walked 1,000 moral crossroads, submits to the logic of the plan because time is a pressure that reshapes iron. Then, with some rueful reluctance and a resolve that will not be easily unmade, they say yes. They give him an accord not of crowns, but of care. We will stand in order, Aragorn declares, voice low and equipped with oath. We will answer to one hand when that hand serves the goal of all. Frodo's fingers close a fraction. He breathes in and tastes the sea and ash and iron scent of a new direction. Steve's face softens for the first time, like a blade eased back into its sheath. I will not make idols of men, he says. I will not let one pursuit cover the world in new chains. We move together. We protect the ring bearer. We bring the point to the place where it can be ended. There is no triumph in his tone, no gladness. His victory is practical and small. They have made for him a map he can follow, a chain of command he can act through. The choice pulls them taut, like cord on bow. It is a change that will not be unmade with a word. To accept a soldier's plan is to accept the discipline of a single mind for the hour of a crushing fight. It is to bind divers' wills to a single course and to gamble that unity will not become tyranny. They take that gamble. They bind themselves with vows old as banners and new as iron. As the council breaks, boots scrape stone, and the wind takes up their movement like a chorus. They shoulder packs and vows in the same motion. Steve turns once toward the sea where his shield had picked up the dawn and then faces the inland road. The last light throws a pale path across the land, and the company, now arranged in a formation the like of which Middle-earth has seldom seen, begins to move beneath a single standard of intent. Each step carries the weight of 1,000 questions. Each step is a beginning upon which fate will press its teeth. They step down from the headland together, following the man from another age who will not let them scatter. His orders are simple and precise. His certainty steers them outward like a prow cutting water. The road ahead is a knife through fog, and the battle for the ring has become, in a way it had not been before, a campaign of soldiers as much as it is a pilgrimage of souls. They marched like a thing remade. Tents were struck at dawn with a soldier's rhythm and pitched again by dusk in a measure learned between men and hobbits. Sentries took posts by compass and by blood, not by whim. Each watchman knew the interval of his step and the sound of his neighbor's boot. The captain brought with him a patience that had been hammered in storms and trenches, and he beat it into their march. 2 hours on, 1 hour off, men sleeping with weapons close and packs light, rations parceled by the weight of necessity rather than hunger's cry. Where once they had wandered in argument and lore, now there were map briefings by firelight and patrol routes scrawled in charcoal. Even the halting private ways of the ring-bearer were fitted into rotation. His rest came under a sentinel's eye. a hobbit covered by types of vigilance older than politics. Gandalf observed this new order with eyes that had known both the rise and the ruin of many plans. He spoke once, in the low tone of counsel that had altered many a night. His words were neither praise nor censure, but a warning that clung like smoke. Discipline, he said, may shape the sword and steady the arm, but it cannot harden the heart against what the ring would teach. Iron will may hold the body, it cannot bind a covetous longing once it is loosed. Aragorn stood near him, cloak drawn, and the king's heir bowed his head, not in disagreement, but in the weary agreement of one who has led and lost. He added, with the blunt speech of a tracker, that order would buy them lives and time would be all the sharper when the enemy forced their hand, and the fellowship learned. At first the drills were awkward as a hobbit learning to tie a boot in wet weather. Elven cadence met dwarven stubbornness. Laughter filtered at odd hours, and the captain allowed it, calling mirth itself a part of morale. Bow and axe met shield and plan. They practiced chain formations through sodden woods. Fools' fears turned into practice feints, and the smallest of them, the one whose shoulders had once hidden a ring, was taught how to sleep with a hand upon the pommel. Scouts fanned like living steel beyond the main road, slipping between trees with a silence that tasted of coal iron and fox pelt. They returned with news of the roads, smoke from distant forges, riders with banners that did not belong to free men, footprints that suggested more than passage. The captain's methods were not mere mimicry of the wars of his own land. He learned the land of Middle-earth in the curve of a river and the cough of a stump. He listened to the old guides, to the soft directions of the elves, to the reading of a stone's wetness. He taught them countersigns carved from his own tongue, brought whistles that cut through rain, and the cry of sentries that would not betray their position. Meals were paired, water conserved, maps read under skinlight and memory light both. Those who had known only questing tales found in his routines a strange comfort. Those who had known only command found in him an authority that was patient and exact. Yet the ring remained a quiet thing, and quiet things are the most dangerous. It shifted in the dark like a slug of shadow, warming the palm of its bearer with a false hearth. At first there were only moments, a hand lingering at a buckle, a hunger for a route unreasoned by any map, a restless turning in sleep. The captain noticed these things in the tilt of a watchman's head or in the way a comrade's humor went thin at the edges. He had been schooled in reading stress and blood, and so he set about insulating the company with routines that could catch a falter before it moved. But the ring is patient and cunning. It does not shout, it murmurs in the tongue of what one most wants to hear. In the long hours of midnight, when sentries doze and the breath of trees drowns the mind, the ring whispered promises. Stay and wear the crown, and see the wars ended without slaughter. Go under my counsel and be known as the maker of peace. It called to a man's weary vanity, to a dwarf's private measure of honor, to the hobbits' fearful love for home, grown larger than the world. Even when a hedge of steel encircled their reason, the whisper sought the seam, the softness in history that could be pulled at until the garment frayed. There was a night when the temptation took a sharper shape. A small raiding band before them had been routed from its route. Came a single charred banner and a satchel of letters, maps skinned from saddlebags. Council read them by torchlight. The captain's face was a map of decisions. He unrolled the stolen maps like a surgeon exposing a wound. "Here," he said, pointing, "is an outpost that keeps watch upon the eastern approach. It is not the Dark Tower, but it sends word upward. If we strike at night and seize their stores and their signal, we might blind a single eye." Gandalf's hand rested on the captain's arm as if to test the steadiness of flesh. "If you draw blood and blade, Sauron will search harder. He will guess and press. You will make him move one way or another." Aragorn's voice followed, low and worn with foreknowledge. "To force his hand is to gamble with all that will follow. But sometimes to stand watch is to give up the field." The men around the fire watched the map as if the charcoal lines were fate. The hobbit who carried the ring sat too close to the heat, and the captain eased him back with a word like a father's. The ring-bearer's eyes were wide, and sleep had already fled him. He felt the shape of choice like a stone beneath his tongue. The captain saw this and did not shame him. Instead, he ordered a new rotation, a watch specifically to protect that one pair of hands. He spoke of the night strike as a measured tactic, not a gamble to be taken for glory. He said plainly that they would take the outpost not to kill its captain or claim his standard, but to sever a line of communication and to seize a pack of signals that could lead Sauron to wrong conclusions. They planned like prophets of iron. Scouts traced two routes, one that hugged the river and carried the danger of wet feet and splintered wood, another that went over a ridge and left them exposed to the wind. They chose the river for its cover. They counted the men known to be on the outpost, left a token decoy by the track to send a false trail, and prepared a silent code of hand and torch for confusion. Hobbits were paired with warriors. A dwarf and an elf would be the living wedge should the night spill into blades. The captain gave the final order in a voice that did not require bell or trumpet. It was the voice of one who had learned to make a moment hold its breath. "We go at the third hour," he said. "We take nothing we do not need. We leave no trace that need be found by men unready to know." Gandalf's counsel did not vanish with the order. He took the captain aside into a thinner place between trees where the night sounded differently, as if listening. "You have given them strength of body," the wizard said, "but there is a strength you cannot gift. There will be a lure, an offering that seems to end war without any harm done by your hand. If you meet such a voice, remember that its gift is a chain in merchant's cloth." The captain's reply was the quiet of someone who had seen 1,000 faces of seduction and stayed his hand. "Then we shall bind each other," he answered, "and if a man should falter, another will bear him from the road. We have made rules to catch weakness. Now we must make courage to keep them." The hour that followed was a study in restraint. Rations were halved so that no man felt the edge of hunger sharpen into resentment. Belts were paired of anything shiny that might glare under a quick moon. The scouts smeared soot upon their faces, and their laughter was a hush. The ring-bearer sat with his small hands folded, and though the ring warmed his palm like a secret from a friend, he did not take it out into the night. The captain had insisted on a rope binding of the hand, the kind that is not restraint, but a promise even so. The little thing hummed with a longing like an insect trapped near the throat. They moved with the river at their right. Frogs leapt into their wake, and water spit small diamonds as they brushed the reeds. Shadows lay flat upon the bank. Stars were tempered by a thin cloud that passed like a breath. The outpost was a cluster of dark shapes against the sky. 2 watchfires, and the silhouette of a tower, where a single lantern burned like a lonely eye. The scouts unfurled their hand signals, and the captain counted quietly. Each man answered with the sound of his breath, a living litany. They slipped inside the ring of watchmen like thieves inside old songs. Steps were measured as if walking upon glass. An elf arched and loosed an arrow that sealed a sentry mouth like a finger upon a bell. A dwarf slipped between beams and punched wood rather than bone, crushing a lock with a fist as if to save harm he might otherwise do in anger. The hobbits, nimble as mice, took keys and threaded the jackets of sleeping men to draw maps and papers. The captain moved through them, a steady shape, not the least of them, though his bearing drew all eyes to him. He was a soldier whose hands still smelled of home-cooked steel, and he carried with him the quiet that belongs to men who must decide lives. They took the stores, ropes, signals, banners with folded codes, a chest of sounders that would have called a watch to arms. There was no slaughter. Where a blade must be used, it was used with the care of a surgeon closing a wound. And yet even as they retreated, the air changed. A horn sounded, not their horn but one far away, a single long summoning that rolled like a stone across water. It was not the immediate clatter of alarm, but the voice of the land being called to something older. Gandalf, distant on another watch, felt the note in his bones. Aragorn stopped and listened, the set of his jaw tracing the edges of old wars. The captain's hand tightened upon the stolen chest until his knuckles blanched. He had chosen to force Sauron's hand. The hand reached back. The knight reared like a drawn blade, not struck, but moved into position. They had the spoils they sought. They had the truth of what might be taken by stealth and what demanded open reckoning. But sound travels like rumor in an open land. By the time they had threaded back to the river and pressed into cover, a black flare rose on the eastern ridgeline, a brief bright as if a torch had been set to a pyre and flung skyward. Those who saw it understood, in the quiet way of men who have known danger, that the strike had been noticed. Sauron's watchful eye had been pricked awake. They ran then, not like fleeing thieves, but like heralds with a message thrust upon them. Each step was a negotiation between haste and concealment. Behind them, in the dim of the eastern ridge, a shout rose, a single hoarse cry that broke like a string. Ahead lay the river, the camp, and the slow, steady breathing of a land not yet ready to be broken. The captain moved toward the sound as if toward a wound he meant to staunch. Gandalf's cloak swept at his heels. Aragorn's footsteps matched his. The small bearer of the ring walked between them, hands bound by the captain's own rope, eyes wide as if watching the world from within a dream. They had taken the chance they had chosen to take. They would now see whether it had been a prudent measure or a step into the maw. The flare on the ridge was still bright when they crossed the last marsh, and from beyond it came the dull, steady beat of marching, a drum that spoke of men on the move. The captain slowed and listened, tasting the night like a man tasting a new enemy. We forced his hand, he said softly, not asking and not declaring. Gandalf looked up at the stars, and in his voice there was the weary music of ages. Then we must answer whatever comes, he said. Aragorn's reply was a single certain sound. We will hold the line, he said. They did not know what that holding would cost. They knew only the motion of it. They pressed on into the dark, and the river took them like a silver prayer toward an uncertain shore. The air tasted of iron and smoke, and his palm remembered the ring as if it were a hot coin pressed into flesh. He had taken it because a cry went up and a line of hobbits wavered a falling rock, a split shield, a sudden surge at the flank, moments small to kings, vast to those who must bear them. He closed his hand about the golden band, and the world narrowed to the single sharp thing that a soldier knows. Keep the line, save the men, live to stand again. The band lay light and wrong in his grip, but it fit like a promise. Around him, men and hobbits breathed hard. Someone wept with the relief of not being dead. The taste of victory was metallic and cold. Orders left his mouth in short, precise bursts that carried farther than their speaker. He did not shout. He drew a map in the dirt with his boot and pointed. Where once the fellowship had debated choices until dawn, he cut the argument like a blade. Move now. Hold here. Leave the wounded where they can be shielded. Adopt the high ground. Let the orcs throw themselves upon the spears. Each command found its mark. Arrows skimmed like stoneflies and found necks and leather. The line, once flayed, knit fast. The enemy faltered, surprised by the economy of violence and the calm that planned it. He felt nothing like triumph. He felt the exacting pleasure a man takes in a well-made plan. Later, when the flames had guttered and the dead were wrapped in cloaks, the hobbits gathered close in a circle so small it might have been the footprint of a child's fist. Their eyes were bright or hollow, and their mouths tasted of smoke. They thanked him in the soft, round voices peculiar to their kind. They thanked him for saving them. And listening, he felt something else take shape. The cool recoil of their gratitude, which carried beneath it a smaller, colder thing, an erosion of their belief in a gentler way. It crept at the edges of their smiles like frost upon leaves. Sam's hands were not steady when he accepted bandages. Mary's laugh was too quick and brittle. They looked toward him as one turns toward a beacon, and in their faces he read a question that had no right to his reply. What is a leader, if not a deliverer? That night, the ring lay against his chest beneath the cloak. It was a bright thing in a dark time, and it pulsed with no outward light, but with an inner cadence that matched his heartbeat. In sleep, it fed him visions like a tactician's fever, marches unrolled like ribbons across the map. Enemy camps lay open to him, their sentries spaced, their supply wagons vulnerable. He saw paths no living general would trust, saddles bent around cliffs, a bridge too narrow for an army, a marsh that would devour the unwary. Each image became signed with the ring's peculiar logic. End this thing swiftly, spare as many as you can do what must be done. Duty, framed as imperative, hammered at his sleep. He woke both relieved and ashamed, with the taste of iron still on his tongue and the memory of a voice that had no throat. In the dawning hours, he began to move like a man whose plan had hardened into bone. Where once the fellowship had skirted trouble, choosing instead to preserve strength, he ordered preemptive strikes. When scouts reported a column of orcs moving through a narrow defile, he placed archers where the stones cast the right shadows, and his men waited like a snare. When reinforcements approached from the east, he sent nimble riders to collapse the trail behind them. Each action saved lives in the immediate measure of flesh and blood. Each action also widened the theater in which violence was the chosen answer. The victories were clean in their intent and messy in their aftermath. Children in nearby hamlets lost their roofs, a mill burned when a stray spark found dry thatch. He counted none of these deaths with pleasure, but neither did he let them stay his hand. A soldier's calculus is a narrow thing. Fewer dead now may mean none later. Word of those victories traveled with the cloak of war. Scouts brought whispers. Sauron's banners had turned eyes toward the new pattern of offense. The Nazgul, some claimed, felt a subtle tug, as if a new lodestone were set within the east. Whether they came by sorcery or sympathy mattered little to those who watched the skies for winged terror. In the councils that followed, men of old wit praised the sharpness of his moves, while others frowned and spoke of pride and doom in the same breath. He listened, as if to counsel meant to be weighed, but the ring had already taught him the simplest arithmetic. Cut off this head, the Hydra's neck may follow. He wanted to believe he would never raise that final blade for idle glory. It was Sam who took to his heels at last, and he did not go to the maps or the encampment. He sought him where the embers still kept some warmth, where the small ones had arranged their blankets on a slope and the stars were clear and jealous. Sam spoke like a man who had been up half the night rolling questions in his mouth to test their fit. "You're different," he said. His voice held no accusation that would cut, only the wonder of a friend who watches a friend change like a sapling pushed to shade. He answered quietly, "I saved you, Sam." The words were even. "That's what a captain must do." Sam's jaw worked. "At what cost?" "You think like a captain. You move like a captain. But a captain gives his word, and he keeps it by blood, lad. You're carrying something heavy. It's not the world yet, but it might be. You can't hold both the band and the promise." There was a rawness in Sam's fear that pricked him more than any blade. He remembered a young man in Brooklyn who had trusted him, who'd folded his small, hard heart into his own. He could not be both the man who never forgot his home and the instrument that would grind it up for victory. Yet, when he closed his fingers around the ring in the dark, its warmth seemed only the echo of duty. It did not yet scream for dominion. He told Sam that he would bear the thing no longer than safety required. He told him truths that were honest in their partiality, and Sam saw enough to be mollified for the night. But partial truths build bridges for falsehoods. The ring, subtle and patient, learned the contours of his virtue in the days that followed. It learned to frame his love for his companions as a design to be perfected by command. It let him taste authority, and then placed before him a map that led to a place many had sworn to avoid. Straight, open battle on the plain before the Black Gate. There, the band suggested, armies could be met and a blow struck so terrible and swift that the war might be finished upon a single field. The thought was intoxicating because of its math. If you could force the enemy into one fight and win it, then all other deaths might be spared. To a soldier schooled in sacrifice and necessity, it read like prophecy. He began to speak in shorter sentences at the councils. He replaced long deliberations with precise objectives. He ordered the construction of palisades not to protect villages, but to funnel the enemy where the sharp points waited. He took scouts further into the night and returned with plans that bent fate by degrees. Allies praised his clarity, and enemies cursed it in the tongues of their chiefs. Yet the hobbits watched the light in his eyes change. Where before there had been warmth and teasing, there stood a narrowed focus that did not leave room for the small comforts they cherished. Stories by the fire, the turning of a teacup, a laugh that lasted through a lull. Hope, as it had once been, is small and obstinate. Under his hand, it learned to shrink. There were moments when the soldier and the moral man warred openly. He found himself lingering at a graveside and thinking of how victory might yield fewer graves in the morrow. He had not intended a crown, he had intended merely to save those at his feet. But the ring has its methods. It does not change a man by force. It becomes the lens through which he understands himself. Duty tightened into an axiom. The end justifies the wielding hand. Each choice made that way was a small surrender. A ration moved, a village bypassed, a raid sanctioned, that added to a slow accretion of power. Whispers crept as shadows do. Some said he moved like one who had tasted command and found it sweet. Others swore he merely stopped the waste of lives by decisive strikes. The truth bent like light through smoke. Both stories were true and neither wholly. He recognized with the soldier's honesty that the calculus of war often demands cruelty to achieve mercy. He also recognized with a quieter dread that the ring now sketched the map of inevitability in his head. It suggested not only where to strike, but who must be broken first. It pressed into him the image of the black gate, vast and laced with iron, and told him plainly that there lay the final reckoning. When he finally stood upon a ridge that overlooked the plain the ring had shown him, the land below hummed with movements like a beast stirring. Camps dotted the waste watchfires, blinked like low stars. Horns sounded somewhere distant, and close at hand, the hobbits woke and folded their cloaks with slow, wary hands. The band in his pocket was a hot rumor against his thigh. He could feel it when the wind shifted. He could feel, too, the weight of a decision gathering in his chest like thunder. To strike at the gate with the ring in his keeping might end the war. To hold back was to let its grinding go on and on, each skirmish costing more small lives than one clean stroke. He pressed a hand to the earth as if to steady himself by the world's solidity. The ring warmed and promised a simple route laid out in crystalline terms. Open the gate, lead the charge, break the Black Tower's will. It would show him how to marshal men, how to turn fear into order, how to make the end so inevitable that Sauron himself would be forced to meet it. The price, the ring implied, was only that he take the final responsibility, that he wear the band while the world bent to the plan. He could not hear it bargain with the voice of a tyrant. It framed its offer always as protection, as duty owed and debt paid. Across the ridge, Sam came and stood beside him without speaking. He put an anxious hand on his captain's arm. "If you choose this," Sam said softly, "you might be right. But we don't get the choosing back, you know. You can't hand it off when you've used it. You'll have to carry what comes after, and some things aren't worth the ending if you'll lose the men who would see the morning." There was a stillness between them, like held breath. The plain below seemed patient as stone. The band inside his pocket felt to him less like a trinket than a lever, and the pulling of it promised ways to close the book on war. He pictured the hobbits safe in their beds, the banners taken down, the long years of mending begun, and he pictured all that would be required to reach such a page, an arm laid heavy, a will unbent. He set his jaw and made a decision he could justify under every code he had ever been taught. He would march upon the gate at dawn. He would wear the ring if it brought the chance to end the slaughter. He would do it not for power, he told himself, but for duty. The band slid warm in his pocket like a pulse. He rose from the ridge with the steadiness of a man who has learned to bear two truths at once, salvation and sacrifice. Behind him, night loosened its hold, and before him the road ran cold and plain. Smoke lay thick in the broken plain, a gray that smelled of iron and ash and the sour sweetness of burned horn. Men and elves moved like ghosts between the wreckage of banners, stooping to lift the living and to cover the dying with cloaks. The assault that had risen like a tide beneath Captain Steve's command had washed upon the slopes of Mordor and broken into ragged shoals. It had not driven Sauron's host before it. Instead, it had bled itself thin, and what remained of the armies hunched and waited, nursing wounds that would not soon close. He stood where the land sloped down toward a blackened ravine, the ring heavy and warm in his palm. The gold seemed to drink the last light, a small sun that threw his face into shadow. Around him, men murmured, and the eyes of the fellowship were upon him now with a new sharp measurement. He had been their leader. By deed, the token of office had been his shield, the pact of command, the words he gave in the tent at dawn. Now another weight sat in his hand, and duty answered it with a different voice, one of insistence, of a plan that became law. Aragorn's voice cut like a blade. "You would use it," he said, "cold as steel. You would make of that thing your instrument. Do you not remember what it has done to proud hearts?" Steve's jaw tightened. He had the soldier's habit of looking at risks and measuring them as tasks. He saw the enemy's lines, the weakness in their flank, the path that might be forced if only a bold, centralized stroke fell upon their command. He saw the ring, not as talisman alone, but as a key. "I will not leave it to chance," he answered. "We cannot hope to outwait Sauron. We must seize the moment." Legolas moved like a wind through the arguments. His voice held no needy pity, but a keen, bright scorn. "Seize further peril, you mean. The ring is not a tool that obeys hands. It is a hunger. You think I would bring hunger upon my own?" Steve's words were quiet, but every man near him felt the steel that lay beneath. He had led men into worse than this and brought them home. He had been born of ordinary morrow and had forged himself into an example. To him, the ring looked like a weapon mislaid, waiting to be wielded. Gimli spat upon the ground. "You would wear a chain forged by an enemy to command us? Nay, better to die free than rule enslaved." Gandalf came then, his robe dust-streaked, his staff nicked by a dozen blows. He did not hurry. He never hurried when speech mattered. He set the tip of his staff into the earth and looked upon Steve with an old sorrow that seldom left his eyes. "Many men of duty have walked this road," he said. "A soldier's eyes see order where there is none. He sees a target and will align the world to strike it. But the ring is not a target, it is a teacher. It will teach you to make of mercy a fault and of command a creed." Those words landed with a dull, relentless thud. Around them, a silence gathered, as if the very wind listened. Steve's mouth tightened. He had been schooled in trust of men who followed because they believed in a mission. He could feel the ring's whisper at the edge of his thought, something that hinted of certainty, of the end of quarrels if only someone would take the reins and not unmake the world by dithering. What he heard beyond that whisper were the groans of wounded fellows and the slow exhalations of exhausted ranks. Time stitched itself, thin waiting would allow Sauron to gather strength. "You would have me throw it away," he said. "You would have us leave ourselves to fate." "That is not what I counsel," Gandalf answered. "I counsel caution. I counsel that those who would bear such a burden must do so without the pretense of command. To take it as a tool is to bandage a wound with salt." A murmur of dissent rose. Some were brave enough to hide it behind the necessity of their own fear. Others stood blunt as rock. Frodo's face, gaunt and pale, looked from hand to hand and then away, as if the days had become too many to bear. Sam clung at his side like a hearth, small and stubborn in the face of a tide. "There is another way," Aragorn said, and he did not raise his voice, but his hand found the hilt of his sword, as if preparing it for a strike that would come of words rather than steel. "We can still split our forces. We can press a feint at the smoke gate, draw what watchers there are, and let a small party, quiet and hidden, work toward what must be done. We no longer need the battered numbers of a full host to accomplish stealth." Steve's eyes did not leave the ring. He turned the small gold on its edge and watched how it drank the light. In the shine of it, he saw an image, a beacon to which every eye would turn, a center around which the scattered enemies might gather. The soldier in him thirsted for the decisive blow. "A feint?" he said at last. "A trick? Tricks win us skirmishes. They do not win wars. We have the chance to strike at the head, to cut the command and let the body fall. You would shave the head with the same razor that binds your hand," Gandalf replied. He stepped closer. "Do you not perceive that the longer it rests upon a man of duty, the more it will shape that man's aims into a single, inflexible mandate? Allies bristle at mandates. Old friendships will bend, then splinter. You will be left with obedience, not fellowship." Obedience. The word struck home like a bell tolling. Around Steve, there had been men who followed because they loved, because they trusted, because they had vowed themselves in broken moonlight and in green fields. He had thought himself the steward of that trust. The ring offered another path, one of unchallengeable authority, and an end to the fumbling that so often stole victory. He imagined orders given and obeyed without debate, a world where hesitation would be punished with immediate correction. The thought pleased him in its clarity and frightened him, as a blind thing frightens a dog. The quarrel did not remain words alone. Hot anger leapt like sparks from flint. Gimli's axe rang against a crate, and he spat an oath that left his voice ragged. Words turned to voices pleading, to accusations laid bare. Men had lost sons, brothers. Trust an idea that another would seize the cause by force of will felt like a betrayal. Someone spat in the dust toward Steve's boots. Someone else offered a quiet prayer for the safety of the ring-bearer. It came to a head when Boromir, eyes rimmed with fever and grief, stepped forward, not yet broken, but close, and his voice was a thing of pleading thunder. "We were given this burden to bear together," he said. "If you would take it alone, if in the name of victory you make us your conscripts, then know this: I will not stand aside while you reshape the world in a foreign iron image." He moved as if to take position, shoulders squared. The others shifted a line formed of stances in sudden readiness. A single misjudged touch could set them all to fighting one another, when Sauron's forces watched and toted new hope in their hands. Frodo stepped between them, small and trembling, and tried to speak. His voice failed. Sam's hand found his sleeve and held fast. The argument might have become blade work between brothers if not for the thing that happened then, an action both simple and terrible. From the eastern slope came a cry as of a hawk in anguish. A rear watch had found a company of Nazgul smuggling through a ravine, bent on cutting off their retreat. They were a slender force, but swift and terrible. No one had eyes enough to watch every flank. The watchers cry rose, and men surged toward the danger while others drew back. Torn between counsel and instinct, it was there that a sacrifice cut through the dispute. One of the younger, Rohirrim, barely more than a boy, threw his body between a charging fell rider and an old man who faltered beneath his old wounds. The rider's horse reared, the boy's face went white under a helm stained with soot. Men moved too slow to save him. He fell not in the grimmest fashion of war, but with the bright, brief clarity of someone making a decision for another. He was not bellowing with heroism. He simply chose to stand there and stop the blow. The rider passed, and the old man was driven to a place where he might live, but the boy lay still, and the light left him. No wounds were described in coarse terms, no gore was invited. The scene's sorrow was pure and cold. The men who watched felt the old, heavy truth settle upon them. Choices had consequences. Lives were being shaped and ended by decisions made in mad, perturbed hours. The boy's hand still lay upon the earth as if to hold his place in the soil. Sam wept openly. Aragorn's face was a carved thing. Even Steve's hand, which had been firm upon the ring, trembled. Gandalf's voice was low and not without reproach. "See how sacrifice descends from the small places," he said. "This is what you would cause more of if you made mandates of mercy. For every order obeyed, a heart will break. The ring teaches obedience, not love." Steve looked upon the fallen. The soldier in him cataloged the loss, weighing it against the scale of outcome. He felt the ring's pulse in his palm as if it beat with the timing of a drum. That pulse told him what he wanted: to end the war now, to spare such boyish lives by ending the threat outright. It argued, as cunning things do, that to seize ultimate control was to minimize cost. He could see the map of battle, the places to press, the towers to take. He could imagine Sauron flung into confusion should his will be met by a rival will unmoved by fear. Then he made his choice. He did not shout. He took off his cloak and wrapped the ring in its folds for a moment, as a captain might stow a flag, and he faced the company. His voice was not loud, but it carried, menacing only in its certain calm. "We move at dusk," he said. "I will take a small spear of us into the Black Gate. We will present ourselves openly, draw Sauron's gaze, and when his eye is turned to the spectacle, we will strike hard at his lieutenants. If the ring can do something to aid us, then I will use it in the moment that breaks him. If it will turn me, then better my strength than another's untried hand." Gandalf's face folded as if in an old wound. "And you think such a gamble different in name from throwing the world to chance?" he asked. His staff struck the earth. "You would place the burden upon yourself and call it justice. Yet the ring seeks a single hand because it will yield power to power." A cold breeze moved through the group, bringing with it the smell of sulfur and the far-off clang of armor. Some looked away. Some clenched their hands until knuckles went white. A splintering took place in silence. Those who would follow a leader with a plan that promised decisive ends, and those who would refuse to march under the banner of any who might be remade by that very banner. Steve folded his cloak again and slid the ring back into his palm until it lay against his skin like a secret. He was a man who had learned to carry other men's safety as a weight upon his shoulders. He knew what it meant to order a charge. He believed in a last, clean strike that would end a war. He also understood, beneath the soldier's reasoning, that the choice bent the shape of souls. He turned toward the ravine and the road that snaked toward Mordor. His gait was steady. Behind him, the fellowship murmured and divided in a way that had nothing to do with rankings and everything to do with love. Gandalf did not follow him yet. Aragorn did not unsheathe his blade. Frodo stood apart, small and watchful, and Sam caught at his sleeve with a grip that said he would not be parted again so easily. Dusk fell like a curtain, and with it came the sound of armor being fitted and flags being mended. Steve tucked the ring beneath the folds of his cloak and set his jaw as one who must bear weight. The path ahead shone faintly as if lit by that small, traitorous sun. He would wear it, or he would shield it, or he would use it vainly to make sure the world bent to a single purpose. Either way, the fellowship would be changed or broken by the morning. The air above the cracks was a thing of its own making, a voiceless furnace that swallowed sound and memory. Ash drifted like black snow, sifted through the light of the errant fires, and the sky hung low, as though it had drawn a thin, tired hood across the world. Around them, the rock gleamed and wept in rivers of molten metal. The wind smelled of old iron and the faint, hateful sweetness that clings to the ruin of great engines. Footsteps came slow and uncertain. Voices came slower still, as if the very speech of men and elves feared to be hewn by that place. The fellowship stood as a ragged knot upon that trembling rim, shield scarred, cloak singed, faces made raw by smoke and grief. They had been tested beyond names, and yet there they were, breathing, stumbling, bound by the single absurd hope that a small thing might still decide the fate of all things. Beside them, the soldier who had borne a different banner smoothed a hand over his battered shield. His arm trembled, not from cold. He had learned command in other wars, had been schooled in orders and the ledger of lives. Here, however, the ledger lay open and naked, and his pen was the hand that held the ring. The ring lay cold in the hollow of his palm, as small and as terrible as a rumor. At the edge of sight, it seemed to glimmer like a distant star lowered into a cup of coal. The presence about it was not merely hunger, it was a language. It spoke in the quick, familiar cadences of power promised. The right word to end a suffering army. The final command that would make corrupt men good and bring down the shadow by making it an instrument. The voice promised an end to war, a swift, foolish mercy, one master to bind all other will. It whispered with the silvered, useless charm of an old lie. It remembered his victories, times when steel and plan had kept innocence from bleeding. It offered him the authority he had been taught to crave, to order, to organize, to end things. It told him he could make the world clean with a single absolute command. It promised that the weight of leadership would finally lift if only he would accept the crown of a tyrant. Around him, the remaining voices answered with a different grammar. One voice, small and fierce, called his name and offered pleading rather than promise. Another, older and weary, warned in the manner of those who knew the ways of temptation. A ranger's low vow filled the space between heartbeats, very close to the hush of the mountain. No one argued. They did not need to. The choice, if choice it could be called, sat in his palm and in the hollow at his throat. For a long moment he heard the world as a soldier hears it, measured in pulses, in the click of a snapped strap, in the faint metallic sigh of a thing about to fail. The ring's voice painted a future where the war was over because he had ended it, and his shield, heavy upon his arm, felt like the proof of that bargain. It was seductive in the way that final solutions always are, simple, immediate, and wrapped in the countenance of mercy. It promised safety in exchange for freedom. It promised an untroubled night, if only he would seize the day. He held the temptation like a scent he had once known, of victory, of homes secured, of faces saved from ruin. He thought of the children of those he had led. He thought of the narrow, aching corridor between battle and rest. The memory of command pressed upon him like stone. To lead, he had been taught, was to take responsibility where others could not. Yet now, the responsibility rose before him like a challenge in itself. Was he to keep the world safe by clutching it to his breast or to lay it down? The ring reached for that lesson and twisted it into a noose. It offered mastery as the only means of protection. It promised that dominion was mercy, that a tight hand could stop war. 1,000 quiet reasons lined up like obedient soldiers. They were all wrong. The soldier felt temptation creep under his skin. It tasted like dusk on iron. His mind ran through orders and counterorders, through lists of what must be done, dates never to be met. The ring's image of a cleansed order shone with the ease of a single command. Yet beneath the seduction, something else, smaller, more stubborn, spoke in another tone. It was not a voice that promised. It was an oath that asked. He remembered faces he had defended and also faces he had failed. He remembered the first lesson of being a leader, that one could not make others safe by making them less free. He had carried standards into battle. He had learned to tell men when to stand and when to fall back. The lesson had been cruelly simple. Power used to bind others also binds the binder. A man who seizes the world for an end can no longer claim to protect those ends. He becomes their jailer. The ring, having lived through betrayals and coronations, knew such truths and mocked them. It showed him the end of Sauron with an image of himself upon a throne. It painted the dead bright and quiet, and it offered him the ease of an imperative that brooked no reply. If he took it, he could end the age of fear tonight, the way a surgeon cuts away diseased flesh. He would be absolute, the remedy and its measure. He looked at his hand. There, the metal gleamed without mercy. He could feel the heat from the fissure licking his boots. He could feel, like the thrum in a wound, the pull of the ring wanting to be back upon the hand that fell before all things. The mountain responded to that hunger. In the shadow of Barad-dûr, a great pressure rose, an answering hunger that beat like a bell. Far below, something vast and unblinking turned its will. The soldier made a choice that did not look like a victory. He stepped back from the edge and let his hand open. He let the ring sit on the stone between his fingers like a bright, small sin. For a breath, the world seemed to hold itself, waiting to see what a man could do with the last moment. Then he did the smallest thing possible for a commander. He obeyed the higher command. He lifted the ring not to clutch it, but to free it. He lifted it not to issue an order, but to obey an ancient duty, the duty to surrender power when power is corrupted. He did this not because it was simple, but because it was true. Around him, the fellowship swayed, as if a gale had run through the row of them. Plucked from his palm, the ring slipped like a whispered promise and fell toward the molten throat. For an instant, it hung above the boiling, a sliver of light in the maw. Then it fell. Sauron's reply was immediate and terrible. The great will poured outward like a tide, a language of force that sought to catch the falling thing. It clawed at the soldier's mind with images of triumph and loss, of familiar faces bent to his command. It offered 1,000 small monarchies, peace by decree. It sought to pull his gaze from the falling gold, to bind his will with the same cunning that had bound so many before him. He could have seized that will and repurposed it. He could have made Sauron's might an instrument of his own design. He had the strength to have tried. He had learned to carry other men's burdens. He had been taught the language of command. Yet the lesson he had learned most painfully was this: no shape of power, no matter how righteous, can remain righteous when it is absolute. So he stepped forward instead of backward. He moved toward the chasm and not away from it. He reached out, not to claim, but to ensure. His hand closed about the ring for the last moment as it slipped, and he caught it to hurl it once more. The act was not an act of dominion, but a sacrament of release. He must have known what would follow. He must have known that in welcoming the cost, he might lose much that he loved. When the ring found the fire at last, the mountain answered in a sound that is not properly called a sound. It was a loosening, a great unbinding. The shadow thinned like a curtain drawn from a dying lantern. The far towers of will that had stretched and gathered up the worlds, despair trembled and sank. A wind swept from the throat of the volcanic forge, carrying ash like black petals. And then a silence came so absolute that voices seemed to echo in the timbre of a vanished drum. In that silence, the soldier felt the price take him. It was not a slaughter, it was a dying of the heroic thing inside him. His muscles slackened, and he swayed as though the burden of command had been physically removed from his shoulders. Where once he had held fast to purpose, now a plain, human weariness lay. Men who had been lithe and quick with the radiance of battle became old overnight. The serum that had sharpened and steadied his form seemed to fall like frost from a summer blade. He had paid in himself the coin the world required. He dropped to a knee. He set his shield upon the ground and did not lift it again. Around him, the fellowship gathered, some weeping and some laughing, each voice long and thin. They were saved. The thing that had bound the wide world into fear had been unmade, yet the victory was not pure. The man who had stood as their banner had been unmade as well. He had not fallen in a single moment of glory. He had been converted from instrument to memory, and that conversion cost him a place among the living leaders. One who loved him reached for his hand. A few words were spoken, rough and kind. He answered them with a look that was not regretful, it was resolute, and full of the quiet that comes when a soldier finally lays down the ledger he cannot carry. He had been taught to command and learned instead to relinquish. He had kept the world by letting go of the thing that would have kept it by enslaving it. The mountain's roar continued in fading timbre down below. The last of the dark became a memory, and then ash. The air grew clearer, and the first pale light of a far-off morning bled through the grime. It touched the battered faces of those who survived, and it touched the shield laid upon the stone. For a long moment, none who stood there spoke of crowns or of victory or even of tombs. There were other things to attend to, the living to guide, the faded and the frightened to tend, the small human work of making shelter where shelter could be made. But even as they turned away from the forge that had tried them all, the cost remained a shape in the mind like a shadow on an otherwise bright day. The soldier's choice had saved the world, yet that saving had delivered up to history a new question. Who would now bear the burden of making the many small, mortal choices that keep peace from becoming tyranny? Who would watch and restrain and, when needed, willingly let go? They took his shield with them. They did not speak of kingship. They spoke in quiet, practical tones about shelters, about paths safe for children, about names to be remembered in the slow keeping of the peace. The shield lay between their plans like a blunt, honest object. It was not a relic to be worshipped, but a tool to be used. It was a reminder that leadership, at its purest, is an act of service and of relinquishment rather than dominion. Behind them, the mountains settled as mountains settle after violent labor. Smoke thinned into a mere taste on the air. Far below, the shadow of the dark tower shrank, and at last was only memory. Yet, the thing that had been given to the world was not simply the end of a great enemy. It was a lesson written in flesh and sacrifice, and the echo of that lesson would shape how nations set their hands to power in the days to come. They moved down from the rim with the cautious hope of those who have seen what can end a life and found it was not enough. The soldier walked slower now, his gait no longer the spring of the invincible, but the measured step of a man who has traded legend for living. Behind him, the fellowship followed, carrying the shield, carrying the memory, and carrying now the intent to bind their victory into something humane. The world was saved, and yet the work had only begun. Men and elves and all the small creatures of the field would have to learn anew how to keep freedom from becoming a new chain. And somewhere, in those first pale hours after ruin, they vowed in soft, tired voices that they would watch for those who would be tempted again, watch for the seductive ease of final solutions, and watch, above all, to teach the coming generations that the truest command is the one that permits release. The vow was not a promise of ceremony or lore. It was the quiet, forward motion of hands that would rebuild, of voices that would tell the story rightly, and of the shield carried not as a crown, but as a pledge.